Hi, it's Economides here from Clime Investment Management. I want to have a discussion with you today about power prices because it's a very topical subject and has been for a while. And just want to give you an overview of how the electricity network works and why we continue to have higher power prices. So let me try and explain it as simply as I can. The power network has four major parts to it. The first one is the generators. They're the power stations that make the power. The second part of it is the transmission, which takes that power and feeds it into the third segment, which is all the power lines, the distributors. And then the final segment is the retailers that actually sell the power to the customer. Now, what's interesting, the way a network works, is each part has a capital cost and an operating cost, and that needs to be funded. So, for example, with a power station, if we have a coal-fired power station, someone needs to build that power station, and then to operate it, we need certain people to run it, we need coal to make it work to produce power. Same with a solar farm. Someone has to pay for it, and then there's lower operating costs because it really just needs the sun and some maintenance. So whilst that might cost a little bit more to build, it might be cheaper to run. Same with transmission lines. With transmission lines, that's a big part of the network because that's always being upgraded, and at the moment we need to upgrade it so that power can flow two ways because a lot of people have solar now, so we need to feed that back into the network, and there's a lot of cost in that. So I guess to sort of summarise what we had 20, 30 years ago when the government owned a lot of the power network, they would wear all these costs and pass on what I would call a fair charge to the consumer. And that worked really well, except our network was ageing, we needed new power stations, we needed new transmission lines, and the government didn't want to go into debt to fund these, so we started privatising the network. As part of that, they set up a regulator, which included IPART, and that made the rules for how people can work on the power station. And that could include what charges a power station might be allowed to collect and what people need to pay to get access to that power. And the idea of that was to be fair to everyone. So if someone was an expensive producer and they came in, it might be hard for them to sell their power. So people really had to come to the party on pricing. What we've seen since we've privatised, not only have we seen an increase in power costs, we've actually seen additional types of power stations come onto the network, like renewables. And a lot of people like renewables because they pollute less. But one of the negatives of many of the renewable sources of energy is they don't produce base load. And base load is a very important concept. Coal-fired power stations and gas-fired power stations produce base load. What that means is when you flick the switch, you get power. If you have solar, it doesn't work very well at night. So with a lot of renewables, we either need a backup in terms of coal, gas, or we need batteries on the system. And there are some battery setups in Australia, but they're really designed for short blackouts or 1 hour blackouts. They're not really designed to power the network for days. They're not designed for that. So what we find is we actually need like a hybrid car type power system where we have some coal, some gas, some renewables, and some storage to make the network work. So how does that all affect prices? If you look historically where we've just had coal and gas, they've all had a charge relating to their capital cost, a bit like your mortgage when you buy a house. There's a certain payment that needs to be made by the network to keep that power station online, and when it's operating, there's another charge on top to cover the cost of coal and some profit. That all works really well, and we end up with one sort of price. But then when we add, say, a solar farm to that, the only way someone's going to build that solar farm is to have the same pricing network where we have that mortgage charge. It might be a 20 or 30-year contract. That has to be paid by the network. And even though the operating charge isn't as much, it still adds to the cost of the network. Now, what the regulator does with IPART is they do a calculation now and work out, with all those power stations in the mix, how much does each kilowatt of power cost? And they do a calculation and they come up with a number. And it increases every year because we keep adding and fixing the network, and the prices never seem to go down. And I think it's just a function of continually expanding and updating the network. That's one reason. The other reason that's quite interesting is, let's say there was a fixed cost of operating the network of $1 billion in a year, say for New South Wales. If everyone in New South Wales suddenly decided to use 20% less power, you would think that we would save 20% in our electricity bill, but that doesn't happen. What will happen is our energy price will go up, so we still in total cover the $1 billion cost. So effectively our energy cost will actually go up to compensate. So we think we're going to save, but we don't. This phenomenon actually occurs when people come off the grid and get solar or batteries on their home. They might save their own cost of power, but what then happens is the cost of power over the whole network hasn't changed because we still have a coal-fired power station, we still have solar farms, we still have wind farms. So we still have to cover the same cost, but less people are paying, so electricity prices go up. This is something that you might not see in literature, and I know it's a simplified example, but it gives some colour as to why prices continually go up in our energy system. Thank you.